So ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. This is a pseudo-scientific term, and it describes a brain tingling sensation that some people experience in relation to particular stimuli. A gallery in Stockholm called ArcDes summed it up really well with their exhibition title, Weird Sensation Feels Good. So ASMR refers to a relaxing sensation which some people experience in unexpected places in everyday life. But it also refers to a growing body of online digital content that tries to elicit this response in the viewer. Oh, wonderful to see some descriptions coming in. So Iliane saying that the sound of nails clicking irritates her. It makes her skin shiver, but not in a good way. So what we see here is photographed 3 primary examples of ASMR triggers, so things that set off the ASMR response, as well as the kind of aesthetics of this new body of content. So ASMR is partly visual, and if we're thinking about the aesthetics of ASMR, it often deploys this kind of hyper-saturated, stylized, feminine, manicured and advertising aesthetic. But the primary sense that activates ASMR is sound. This means that we're going to be a little bit hampered today when we're focusing on imagery, but certainly we can imagine the sounds that these photographs would trigger. Moreover, a lot of the examples that I'll be showing you today provide a kind of visual equivalent to the sonic qualities of ASMR. So let's look at these photographs to start with and think about the sounds that they conjure. Tapping, touching, shifting through lollies, cutting soap. Other common ASMR triggers include whispering and crisp sounds like crinkling paper, popping bubble wrap, brushing hair, applying makeup, playing with slime, and of course, cutting soap. So ASMR is produced by quite normal everyday actions, but these are then exaggerated and repeated by what's known as ASMR artists for the online community. ASMR has addictive qualities, and it has been booming in popularity in the past few years. At the moment, the highest earner on YouTube is Jane ASMR, with 10 million subscribers and estimated earnings of over $6 million a year. Quite a big field. In 2014, the New York art critic Jerry Saltz wrote a very interesting article on selfies. In this text, he sets out a kind of prehistory and a typology of the selfie. So he's thinking about what came before the selfie, and he's also thinking about the kind of boundaries of what makes a photograph a selfie. And today I'm going to be following in his footsteps, but I'll be using ASMR. Like Jerry Saltz, I want to argue that ASMR is a folk art. And what I mean by that is that it's a new genre that has been produced by everyday people. I also want to think about its primary features. So what are the kind of common things that we see in ASMR? And where did these already exist in the history of art? And by keeping those questions in mind, I want to think about how ASMR might be changing our visual landscape. All right, let's dive in. This work was recently shown at QAGOMA as part of the most recent Asia Pacific Triennial. It was shown in its own room and it had 2 exits, which meant that you could come into the room and you would either then choose to stay and watch it, or you would choose to leave the room, which meant that while you were watching this video, you were also observing other people coming in, taking note of how long they stayed and their reactions, and kind of chuckling to yourself if they left before you. So exactly what is happening in this video. As I describe it, I want you to imagine how it might make you feel, and maybe even to guess how long you might stay and watch this video. Here we see a lurid yellow backdrop with a finely manicured young woman. She's wearing casual corporate wear and she's placed a plump cherry tomato between her teeth. Slowly, slowly, gently, gently, she closes her teeth around the tomato, forcing it to burst. The juice dribbles down her chin. And as we watch this video, it sounds like the microphone is inside her mouth. It amplifies every single squelching, bursting, dribbling noise. Next, it cuts to a close-up of her hands, and we see this same kind of action repeat, this time with an orange and her fingernails. Slowly, slowly, she squeezes against its skin, and it seems at first as though the orange will resist her pressure, but as she continues squeezing, the skin inevitably breaks. Juice oozes everywhere and the flesh is torn apart. The sounds are so intense that they seem to go through your ears and trickle all the way down the back of your throat. So how do you think watching this video might make you feel? Do you think you would stay to watch it or leave? I want to start with this video because Ho's overexposed memory is an archetypal ASMR work. The only kind of real difference between this and the ASMR that we see on YouTube is that this we encounter in the gallery. We could also maybe say that the production values of this work are higher than what we see on YouTube. But otherwise, all of the kind of fundamental earmarks of ASMR are present in this work. So some of those things include the content. We have the kind of everyday activity of eating, which has been made strange, slowed down, and turned into a performance for the camera. In terms of who is doing the performing, we have a manicured and young, attractive woman. In terms of the aesthetics, we have the kind of very typical saturation of color and sound. And then in terms of themes, and I'll be exploring these more this morning, there's themes of consumption and distraction. Ultimately, though, what makes this a really classic example of ASMR is the fact that it is polarizing. Some people love this work, some people find it absolutely revolting and can't wait to get out of the room fast enough. So as I move through this morning's talk, I'll be thinking about the qualities that we see in this video and where we see them elsewhere in contemporary art. All right, Svetlana Bailey is a Russian artist based in New York, but she lived and studied in Australia for 8 years. If you Googled her, you would see that more typically she photographs domestic scenes with a kind of washed out color palette or wide view landscapes, which are washed out by fog. But here, this particular photograph reveals the advertising aesthetic that is very common to ASMR. So it's a kind of hyper glossy photograph. It has a very tight focus. There's a kind of luxurious feel to this image, and it's kind of so candid, but actually a very careful composition. But most importantly, this work gains its visual power from an undeniable tension between its formal elements. So let's talk about those a little bit more, and let's launch our second poll. When you look at this photograph, what do you experience more strongly? Is it those hyper-saturated colors, or is it the fleshy textures? Oh, wonderful to see those responses coming in. So in terms of the colors, we have really beautiful pinks of the two strawberries. This color field is heightened by the pink backdrop and also by that really luscious droplet of strawberry juice which hangs between the two strawberries. But of course, there's also a kind of gut churning documentation of rotting flesh in this video, in this photograph. So we see the bruised skin and the black seeds on that right strawberry, but also this composition squishes these two forms together. And it's this kind of blending of boundaries that might call to mind Julia Kristeva's theory of the abject, which we discussed last week when thinking about peculiar performance art. And I would say that this kind of idea of the abject is a very common, but most likely unintentional trope in ASMR. Okay, so 80% of us found those fleshy textures overwhelming versus 20% of us who were more taken by the colors. Now, I did not plan this, but boy, you guys have really set me up perfectly for this. About 20% of people find ASMR triggers pleasurable. So exactly the same match as we have here. The vast majority of people, 80%, do not find any enjoyment in ASMR. So what I want to really kind of highlight here, and you guys have really made this point perfectly for me, is that different people experience senses differently. We have different senses that are stronger, and we also might interpret things through our senses as either pleasurable or disturbing. Of course, I also can't talk about strawberries without talking about trypophobia. Some of you might have heard of this. Triggers for trypophobia include strawberries, beehives, lotus seed pods, pancakes, and crumpets. All of these objects have surfaces that are interrupted by holes, and trypophobia is experienced as a kind of queasiness, disgust, horror, even fear when looking at these objects. Let's stay in the kitchen a little bit longer. Here I want to think more about the domestic space, women's role, and cooking shows. Martha Rosler's Semiotics of the Kitchen is a parody of cooking shows, and she's using the language of conceptual art to perform this. So we see the artist in the kitchen and immediately recognize this visual language. It kind of calls to mind Nigella Lawson or Pauline Yao, these figures that we're used to seeing in the kitchen talking about food. So she's standing in the kitchen, she's behind a bench, and she's addressing us directly through the camera. But the tone in this work is all wrong. Cooking show hosts are normally effusive. They have enthusiasm for the smells and the tastes of food that they make in the kitchen. By contrast, Rosla uses a deadpan tone to take us through an ABC of cooking utensils: apron, bowl, chopper. Moreover, she's quite aggressive in her ABC. So she demonstrates the chopper by banging this metal tool against the base of a metal bowl. Clunk, clunk, clunk. If we look at that second still, we also see her brandishing a knife. In order to demonstrate using this knife, she doesn't use it against the chopping board as we might expect. Instead, she holds it in her hand and stabs the air as though she's imaginary stabbing someone. It's exceptionally violent in a very peculiar kind of way. So this work was made in 1975, International Women's Year, and it functions as a critique of restrictive gender roles, which expected women to be in the kitchen and to behave in particular ways. It is also a critique of conceptual art, specifically the kind of dry and masculine logic which used black and white photography as a kind of truthful form of documentation. So here she's using parody to play with these two forms, one of traditional femininity and two of masculine art history. She's injecting humor, aggression, and an alternative way of being into both life and art. And what I've just said here is the typical way of discussing Martha Rosler's work. But I also want to think about this video as a predecessor for ASMR. And we can already bring these to mind if we start thinking about the similarities between Martha Rosler videos and Joyce Ho's. Both of these have a single woman performing for the camera, thinking about femininity and domesticity in the context of eating. Both of these videos make everyday behavior strange through repetition and exaggeration. And most importantly, this alphabet of objects which Martha Rosler presents is also an alphabet of sounds: chopping, whisking, stirring. And then we listen to semiotics of the kitchen. We might experience it as familiar, maybe as pleasurable, but much more likely as grating. These are unpleasant kitchen noises. There is a term for the hatred of sounds, misophonia. And misophonia is, interestingly, both a type of ASMR and also its opposite. Misophonia is a condition where sounds provoke irritation, anger, and even panic. This work, Tapitapultas or Catapults, is a 3-minute video that belongs in the QAGOMA Collection. In this still, we see a close-up of the two artists, Donna Conlon and Jonathan Harker. They're situated outside. We see lush greenery filling the background. They're in a nature park in Panama. And closer to us in the foreground, we see a scattering of brilliantly coloured and different sized plastic bottle lids. The artists are using them to play a game. They're launching these lids through the air with plastic spoons, so using their spoons as catapults. And they're attempting to get them into a hole in the ground. We can kind of just see it here. So there's this kind of wonderful repeating tic-tac landscape or soundscape of these caps being flung about. And there's also a distant bird song. So looking at this video, I'm thinking about collections, kind of gathering similar objects together. And so my third question for this morning is, do you collect anything? Michaela, thank you so much. So I want you to think back to that opening slide for this morning's lecture. The middle photograph showed a series of very neatly arranged candy bowls, each of them filled with a single colour of Skittles. This is very common in ASMR videos. They kind of bring together and document collections of objects, lollies, toys, makeup, soaps. In a lot of these videos, we see the same kind of object piled up in order to hear the sound of hands rifling through them, producing various sounds and sensations. In other videos, we see them very neatly ordered and arranged. H. Morse, is 6 guitars a collection? I'd say that you're on your way, definitely. Okay, so about 60% of us collect something. This is a very kind of common tendency in contemporary life. And when we're thinking about collections in ASMR, in art, we can also start thinking about that contemporary trend towards tidying up. We saw this recently with Marie Kondo and her life-changing magic of tidying. Even more recently, there's a new Netflix show called The Home Edit, where the two hosts kind of half explain, half sell to us the message of tidying everything in our lives into little plastic boxes and arranging them by color. But as this video continues, it reveals the forest floor well below the concrete platform. And now we see a towering collection of plastic bottle lids that have landed on the forest floor. So this is very jarring imagery, a mountain of worthless plastic within the natural landscape. And I want to use this video to think about a darker element that exists in ASMR. Some of you might be tweaking to this, but I'm going to make it explicit with the next slide. Okay, so I said briefly that I want to think about a darker element in ASMR, and I'm going to draw this out in this work. No, that's not personal at all. Go ahead and ask Vanessa. No, I do not experience ASMR. I find it very irritating. Okay, so let's spend one moment with this photograph. It has not been photoshopped, so consider what has happened here and maybe even how this makes you feel. The artist, Gordon Clark, has cut through a building. He has also, if you look over to the left, he has also removed the foundations from that section of the building, encouraging it to very slightly and precariously tip apart into, yes, teetering into two halves. Gordon Clark trained as an architect, so he has a kind of strong understanding of how buildings work. And he was influenced by the land art movement, again, which we encountered last week in the That's Art talk. And so here he is reconceptualizing buildings, thinking of them as raw materials, and he's transforming them into temporary sculptures by using a chainsaw. The results are these buildings, which he called anarchitecture, the kind of squishing together of anarchism and architecture. And these projects sit somewhere between architecture, installation, sculpture, kind of social politics and performance. Slashing and slicing is very common to ASMR videos. We also saw this in the opening photograph for today, where one hand was holding a soap that had been kind of gridded up the way that you do with a mango, and then another hand was using a razor to slice these gridded shards away. These videos produce visually and sonically mesmerizing scatterings of shards. But here I want to think of these ASMR videos as gross spectacles of collection, consumption, waste, and destruction. In its worst form, ASMR is a kind of performance of contemporary gluttony. So ASMR artists consume foods at speed, not for sustenance or even pleasure, but for the images and the sounds that are produced by eating quickly, taking large bites, and chewing excessively loudly. Another kind of trend in ASMR videos is smashing objects underneath water in order to observe how they break apart when submerged. And of course, we also see them destroying makeup and slicing through food and soaps. So this has me thinking, what kind of pleasure is derived from crass destruction of objects? You know, ASMR is normally touted as a cure for the anxiety and sleeplessness of contemporary life, but maybe it's a symptom, and even worse, maybe it's the cause. Or maybe we can recoup ASMR into something intelligent and purposeful, the same way that destruction means something significant here by Matta Clark. So Matta Clark was living in New York at the height of a significant economic downturn. The houses that he split were slated for demolition. So these works aren't kind of wanton destruction. Instead, they're highlighting failed politics, highlighting the kind of failed promises of urban renewal and this kind of failed idea of consistent economic growth. Tom Folland, an art historian, also makes the argument that at the end of modernism, Gordon Matta Clark's fragmented houses function as a kind of metaphor for abandoned hope. So a rather kind of, you know, distressing note to think about this kind of symbolism of destruction in the context of economic downturn. If that's all got us feeling a little bit sad, don't worry, I have something to cheer you up. So let's launch our next poll. Would you put on PPE for a hug from a stranger? As we work our ways through COVID-19, we're all developing new ways of being in public space and interacting with others. We're now used to queuing 1.5 meters apart. I live in Queensland, which means that I voted this morning and I was part of a very stretched out queue. We delicately step to the side when passing others on the footpath. And now each new interaction with friends and colleagues and family is weighed up with the decisions of should we hug, should we kiss, should we handshake, or should we forego all tactile interaction? Let's reveal those results. pretty evenly split. Our highest is a kind of maybe. Only a few of us are keen for a hug, and some of us don't ever like hugs. My best friend doesn't like hugs, so I understand. So throughout August till October, the artist Miranda Davies offered members of the public safe hugs at the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane. Both the participants and the artist would put on their masks, glasses and gloves. They would then stand in a designated space and hug. When the hug was over, they would discard all of that PPE, and the artist, with a kind of creative flourish, would spray the entire space with disinfectant. So in the context of COVID, this work, Imprint, highlights the very somber reality that our bodies are potentially dangerous to each other. It's a kind of response to the lack of human touch that many of us have suffered through this year. And the artist kind of responds to this by filling the role of service provider and caregiver. This performance of care is something that also occurs in ASMR. So in one kind of stream of videos, ASMR artists perform by pretending to do your makeup, pretending to brush your hair, to check your health, or to take your measurements. So they're slipping between the kind of roles of beautician and doctor, variously looking after our looks or looking after our health. And throughout these videos, they kind of fill their speech with gentle, encouraging affirmations. There's a really curious suspension of reality involved in this strain of ASMR, because of course these videos are pre-recorded. They're not really addressing us or caring for us. And we see the kind of parallels with fakery with this hug performed by Miranda Davies, where the potential for intimacy is immediately undone by an exaggerated spray of disinfectant. So this kind of suspension of reality has me thinking about one of my absolute favorite works of art of all time. And I'm now going to do something very embarrassing and sing for you all. I can see your face in my mind. I can see your face in my mind. Of course I can't see your face. I have no idea what your face looks like. You could be anybody out there. Oh God, there's gotta be somebody. There's gotta be somebody watching me. Somebody who wants to come in close to me. Look, I can wrap myself around. Don't you want to come in here? Sure. These are the opening lyrics and the opening words of Vito Acconci's theme song. There's a real joy in this artwork, in the very compelling combination between Vito Acconci's rather unattractive form. He's balding, he's smoking, he's lying awkwardly on the ground with his face near the camera. But then we've got this absolutely overwhelming charisma of his speech. I hope that I mimicked him well. His voice is gravelly and soft, and he dips in and out of singing the songs that are playing on the background as he wills us, someone, anyone, to join him. So it has this kind of, very kind of sexy suggestion that we might somehow step inside the video and join him for a saucy encounter. So here I'm thinking about the element of seduction that plays out in ASMR. Seduction, sexuality, and sex work are very highly contentious elements of ASMR. In 2018, China banned all ASMR videos, calling them adult content. PayPal froze ASMR accounts, saying that the videos violated their policy against sexual content, and Patreon added a not safe for work banner to ASMR profiles. Whispering, tapping, slicing is not sexual. So how did this happen? Well, I'm going to give you 3 conflicting answers. The first answer, which is really infuriating, is that small communities on the internet who are motivated by jealousy and misogyny have organized very explicit campaigns to remove ASMR artists from the internet and to prevent them from making money. So this is part of much larger discussions about who owns the internet, who has colonized it, who polices it for themselves, and how do they react when new genres and new names seek to make space for themselves. Another kind of explanation for this is the fact that, of course, as we know, not everyone experiences ASMR. And for people who don't experience ASMR, the relaxing sensations, which others do experience, can be misinterpreted as a form of arousal. This especially happens because ASMR brain tingles are sometimes described as a brain orgasm. So this has led to some people thinking that those who use ASMR use it as a form of pornography, despite the fact that this is not true. But finally, to really, really complicate things, I want to argue that ASMR is seductive. Its primary makers are young, attractive women performing online for money. This means that they exist within the unavoidable spectrum of the contemporary patriarchal capitalist world, from the waitress who smiles for a tip through to the sex worker who performs on camera in exchange for payment. So what I'm trying to argue here is that it doesn't really kind of matter if ASMR is sexual or not. The reality is that being a woman and making money in the contemporary world is something that we have difficulties dealing with. So the problem lies not in ASMR. All right, let's shift direction again. Now I want to think about slowness. Let's launch what I think is our final poll for today. How long do you think the average person spends with an artwork in the gallery? And while you answer that, I'll talk about these works. On the left, we have Daniel Crooks, a New Zealand artist based in Australia. In this video, he has trained his camera on an elderly man in Shanghai going through his morning routine of Tai Chi. This is a slow and ancient practice dating back to 12th century China. As we see from this screen grab, the artist Crooks has manipulated this video, kind of stretching out and slicing together different temporal fragments. It's a kind of temporal rippling, which is exceptionally engaging to watch. On the right, we have a video by Hugo Rondinone called Cigarette Sandwich. And anyone who has seen, or better yet heard, this video will know immediately why I have chosen it. And of course, that's for the droning, wistful background soundtrack that's kind of full of promise and boredom and ennui. For what seemed like forever, this video played between the entry floor bathrooms at QAGOMA. This is a kind of non-space in the gallery. It's not somewhere that you normally kind of go deliberately in order to look at a work of art. Instead, it's somewhere that you sit while you wait for someone else to go to the bathroom. But this soundtrack, it's like it's wormed its way into my brain and stayed there forever. Specifically, it's a snippet from the Tinder Sticks Sleepy song, which the artist has collaged together with a short snippet of this figure walking against a brick wall. And then he's looped these fragments together for an hour, making it very unlikely that anyone would sit and watch this entire film. Nevertheless, its kind of sleepy, dreamlike affect is exceptionally strong. Okay, so let's have a look at those answers. The vast majority of us have done very well. The correct answer is that the average amount of time we spend with an artwork is 17 seconds. So I think most of us think of galleries as places where we slow down. But 17 seconds is actually a very small amount of time. It's quite surprising how little we spend with artworks. So against this statistics, Crooks and Rondinone both belong to a contemporary trend toward slow consumption. They encourage us to be mindful, relaxed, engaged, and to spend more one-on-one time with works of art. So I want to think about this in the context of ASMR. Oh, excuse me. So on social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, ASMR videos are very short. They're normally in the realm of under a minute. And when one video ends, another video starts, which encourages a kind of mindless, zombie-like passive consumption of endless videos without an awareness of time. This is something that very famously Guy Debord warned us against. More recently, we've had the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, kind of urging us to get off our phones and detox from social media. But other forms of ASMR buck those social media trends. On YouTube, it's very common to find ASMR videos that run for hours. So here in this kind of longer form of ASMR, they also operate as a form of slow art, or similar to meditation apps and sleeping podcasts. And it's in the realm of sleep that we're going to end this morning's discussion. Ilya and Amelia Kabakov's House of Dreams responds to the serenity of the gallery. They used existing architectural components of the Serpentine Gallery in London, so the walls, the staircases, even the hanging systems, and then they added these big, thick, high-sloped beds and perimetered them with delicate white curtains, creating discrete areas for audiences to lie down, daydream, and sleep. The English art critic Jonathan Jones describes these sleeping spaces as similar to patient beds, sarcophagi, mausoleums, and even tiny bedrooms. In this act of looking after our sleeping needs, the Kabakovs join Ai Weiwei, Anthony Gormley, Marina Abramovic, Karsten Holler, and a whole suite of other contemporary artists who have all created beds or rooms for audiences to use, suggesting that there's a kind of contemporary trend of artists seeking to take care of us by providing safe sanctuaries for our overworked minds and overworked bodies. And here is where I really want to finish with the primary purpose of ASMR. A recent study by Swansea University researchers found that over 85% of ASMR users use ASMR content to reliably help them to fall asleep. So ASMR is intriguing, mesmerizing, revolting, and maybe even questionable in our contemporary capitalist world. But ultimately, its primary purpose is quelling anxiety, overriding insomnia, and generating sweet dreams.